I'm Laura Bonnell, and this is the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast coming to you from Detroit. Please subscribe and even rate and comment on our podcasts when it moves you. I learn something new with every podcast, and I'm always inspired by the people that are showcased here. We don't give medical advice. You need to connect with your doctor for that. I hope that this Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast educates you and sparks some volunteering or advocacy. The CF community needs people like you. Thanks to our sponsors, Viatris and Vertex, for their support. Science has always fascinated me. I even often joke that I'm not smart enough to be a scientist, but I deeply respect the people who are, and especially those who can explain complex science in a way that the rest of us can understand, and that's exactly why I am excited for today's guest. It is Dr. Steve St. Onge, who is the Chief Business Officer at Clarametyx, and Steve is a PharmD and MBA with more than 15 years of experience spanning clinical care, medical affairs, and biotech leadership, and he talks a little bit more about that. And what I appreciate most is how clearly he explains the work of Clarametyx and what they're doing and why it matters for people living with chronic respiratory disease. It's so important. We actually met last year at the North American Cystic Fibrosis Conference in Seattle, so that was great to meet in person. It was really a chance to connect and talk about the Clarametyx approach, and it's very exciting. There's so much promise. The work they're focusing on targets biofilm-driven inflammation and progressive lung damage, an area of real unmet needs in conditions like cystic fibrosis. And today he's going to break it down for everybody so that you know why it is so important what they're doing and about the clinical trials. So welcome, Dr. Steve St. Onge, and it's so great to have you, and I'm so glad that I got to meet you in person first. It seems usually I don't get to meet people in person first because, from the pandemic to this time, a lot of meetings were on Zoom. So it's great to have met you at the NACFC originally.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Laura. What a wonderful conference. I agree. What a pleasure to meet in person. And it's a privilege to be here. And I just want to thank you personally for all that you're doing for the CF community and giving this community hope for a cure. I know that I have the privilege to wake up every day and think about how we can change the treatment landscape in CF, but it's really folks like you that are driving every day to make sure that there is hope for this community.
Thank you, but I have to say right back at you, because you're doing so much for the future of CF, and I can't wait to get right into it. But first, tell us kind of about your journey and how you got to Clarametyx and why you wanted to be in this science profession to begin with.
So I'm actually a pharmacist by training. So I got my doctor of pharmacy from Albany College of Pharmacy in New York, did some postgraduate training focused on critical care medicine, mainly medical intensive care. Spent about my first decade in clinical practice and academia, both working in a medical intensive care unit as well as doing lectures for pharmacy schools, nurse practitioner schools, nurse anesthetist schools, and otherwise. And then back in 2015, I really made a big leap of faith and decided to leave clinical practice full time and come to the biotech industry. And the thought behind that was that I could really make an impact on patient care at a larger, more macro level. As a clinician, we have the privilege of interacting with patients. And in my instance, a lot of times patients that were intubated and sedated, so more interacting with families and trying to make an impact directly in their lives. But when you get into biotech and drug development, you start to see what a great impact you could have across just a much larger scope. You think about large disease states like hypertension or oncology, things like the impact millions of people, not only in America, but around the world. And you start to see the value in thinking, how my scientific credibility and knowledge could really go on and make a more meaningful impact on the world. So that was really what drew me to biotech initially, and entered the industry in 2015, went back to business school simultaneously while coming to the
Awesome.
Industry. Started in biotech on the R&D side, so focusing on late stage development of drugs, phase 3 and later, and then also managing relationships with some of the key clinicians and advisors in those therapeutic areas that companies look to really help guide their programs and further development. So I did that for a few years. I had some great experience, including interactions in person at FDA and being involved in drug development programs and study design. Then I realized it was time to put my clinical knowledge and my MBA to work simultaneously. And there are not a lot of opportunities in biotech or pharma to do that. But I was just very fortunate to be able to step into more of a corporate role back in 2020. And that corporate role, really my remit was for the company I was working at the time, to go out and identify additional products that we could bring into the company's portfolio to either develop those drugs in earlier stage development or commercialize them and bring them to patients that were out there waiting for our innovation. So really an entirely different strategy than on the R&D side, more corporate focused, and interfacing with executive leadership and finance.
Don't you think that gave you such a well-rounded, you have perspective like very few people do, I think, from the patient all the way around. I just think that's so helpful. It must be so helpful to you. It's so needed.
It's incredibly valuable. And I think if you look in the biotech sector broadly, the number of people with strong clinical patient acumen, drug development acumen, and business corporate execution acumen, it is pretty small. And I think, my experience working with a number of executives throughout my time in the industry is those that know just enough about all pieces and segments of the company are the best leaders, because they're the ones that are able to understand whether I'm talking to a early stage scientist, a manufacturing person, a finance person, or a marketing person. Just have enough ability to understand what's important to them and why decisions that I might be making as an executive are having an impact on their day to day. So I agree entirely. Yeah, I think of it as a pretty unique skill set, and one that I'm just privileged to be able to put to work every day. So getting into the corporate side, in 2023, I was lucky to lead the sale of a public company. And thinking about my journey to that point, just 8 years before that, I left clinical practice as a clinician. And in that 8 year time, it had gone from doing things at the patient level to selling a public company. It's a pretty wild journey when I look
That
back on it.
is.
And I'm just blessed to have incredible mentors and folks around me that believed in me to get me to that point. So following the sale of that public company in 2023, I came to join the team at Clarametyx, who had just moved their first program with a therapeutic monoclonal antibody into the clinic. And the company had also announced, right when I was joining, the closing of their Series A funding, which was actually led by CF Foundation, is the largest institutional investor in Clarametyx Series A financing. And their partnership really allowed the company to accelerate development of its therapeutic monoclonal antibody beyond the first clinical study, and then get into a second clinical study in patients with cystic fibrosis.
And before we get into all the things that Clarametyx does, kind of tell us, what size is Clarametyx? And then I wanted to ask you a bunch of questions about what you're doing, what the company's doing.
So we're small but mighty. The company was founded in 2020 with 5 full-time employees. We're now up to 10 full-time employees, a couple fractional employees, and then a army of consultants, which really allows us to fill the gaps where some of our internal personnel may not have expertise. It's really an incredible effort when you think about the team size, as well as the fact that we've raised, only about $44 million to date to be able to bring 2 programs through development and one into the clinic, with our lead program recently having a positive phase 2 readout in cystic fibrosis. When you think about it, taking a step back, it's really been an incredible effort across the last 5 years.
Absolutely small but mighty, because I'm so impressed with everyone that I met on your team. You've done so much, and we need to talk about it. You're going to explain this, and you and also Ella, who's on your team, and Kelly and everybody else, and Dave, they also helped explain it to me. But you're working on tackling inflammation, which is huge in the CF community and for the other areas that you're working in. But if you can explain, it's the phase 2A study that's evaluating the CMTX 101 in CF, and even explain what the CMTX 101 is, so everybody knows kind of where we're coming from.
Yeah, so let's start with the technology. It's an interesting approach to treating cystic fibrosis and really chronic inflammatory respiratory diseases, and one that has not been successfully explored in the past. So our technology specifically targets the biofilm. And those within the CF community may, heard tidbits here or there about the biofilm, but essentially what the biofilm is this protective structure that bacteria like to put up around themselves to protect that from killing by antimicrobial peptides, neutrophils, inhaled or systemic antibiotics. And over the course of evolutionary biology with bacteria, they've become incredibly skilled at putting up these biofilms and serving as another mechanism of antimicrobial resistance. I think we talk about AMR generally across
Right.
the CF community and the chronic respiratory community, and we always think about it from a direct acting antibiotics and how those bacteria have engineered themselves to become resistant to those antibiotics. But this is a whole nother facet of the resistance game.
And before you continue, can I just say, as a parent of two daughters with CF, I am as excited about this as I am about CF modulators. I think it is that important. This will save our kids' lives. This is huge. No pressure, but it's huge. So continue. I just wanted to say that's the MAC that you can attack. This is so huge. If people don't get it, or if they don't have a CF connection and they're listening, this is massive.
We agree because we think that there's so many prongs that this technology addresses within the vicious vortex of respiratory disease that have never been addressed by other products or other available therapies to patients only address a small portion or a single part of that vicious vortex. And in addition to addressing inflammation, which we think is one of the key drivers of exacerbation of lung function decline in CF and other bronchiectatic lung diseases, this also addresses the antibiotic component too. So if you could shorten the courses of durations of antibiotic therapy, avoid antibiotics altogether, reduce the pulmonary bacterial burden in a patient's lungs, and provide inflammation benefit, lung function improvement, less exacerbation, better field function based on patient reported outcome scores. Like, we really think that this technology encompasses all of those. And our hypothesis, which we think is now proved with the phase 2A result, is that the biofilm is really core to this whole problem and is the source of inflammation. And if you can remove that source of inflammation, the downstream impact to patients, not only from how many bacteria do you have, but more importantly, how do you feel and how do you function every day, is going to be what drives this program forward and is, hopefully such a advance in CF care.
Can you kind of talk about what you have seen in the clinical trials? Are you allowed to discuss kind of what you've seen happen and what your hopes are moving forward?
Yeah, so we've announced it publicly. There's still a lot of data coming in from the study, and first and foremost, I want to thank the patients and our investigators in the CF network and the therapeutic development network with CF Foundation for really getting us to this important inflection point. We wouldn't have been able to pull off any of this without our clinicians and patients believing in this technology and being willing to be part of clinical research, which we know for early stage products like CMTX 101, we're asking a lot of patients and families. So I want to thank all of those folks for contributing first and foremost. So yes, the phase 2A study, we examined CMTX 101 in patients that had chronic Pseudomonas infections which we know is fairly commonplace in the CF community,
Hmm.
even for patients that are on CFTR modulators. So we examined CMTX 101 efficacy in those Pseudomonas patients who were already on CFTR modulators as well as inhaled antibiotics. So we know that CFTR modulators plus inhaled antibiotics is already a highly effective standard of care. So what we were looking to do is show that CMTX 101 could have an impact on top of that already highly effective standard of care. And I'm really pleased to report that we did see that in our phase 2 study. Not only did we see that the drug after a single IV dose was very safe and well tolerated, we also saw reductions in pulmonary Pseudomonas burden. We saw a reduction in key inflammatory biomarkers, including neutrophil elastase, which is quickly becoming one of the most important inflammatory biomarkers in chronic respiratory disease, because neutrophil elastase is closely associated with and correlated with pulmonary exacerbations. So we feel if you can dramatically reduce neutrophil elastase, that in future studies, we may be able to see a signal where we're seeing a reduction in exacerbation. And then also in a study, we saw what we believe is pulmonary lung function stabilization and potentially improvement. And so we know that in the era of the CFTR modulators, that it's been difficult to demonstrate lung function improvement on top of that standard of care. And we think that we've at least demonstrated stabilization of lung function with signs of improvement in some patients. So all in all, we are really thrilled about the results from this small 42 patient study. And we have already started planning what the next phase of development looks like. And that's going to be in a larger phase 2 study in patients with all forms of bronchiectasis. And that would include cystic fibrosis as well, because we feel that the results from this CF population translate very well into the broader chronic respiratory and bronchiectasis landscape, where there is meaningful innovation going on right now, but we don't believe that those innovations tackle all the prongs of the respiratory vicious vortex that CMTX 101 does.
And you know why? Another reason, there's so many, that this gives me hope is not only will this help people who are on the CF modulators because they're still getting sick. They absolutely need what hopefully comes to fruition after all the work you're doing. But the final 10%, if that don't have a CF modulator, if it's going to be a while, and I hope it's not for them, but this will help keep them healthy until they do get one. This will, I think, theoretically, I'm not sure, you're the scientist, but I think that this will keep their lungs from scarring so that they can stay as healthy as possible until that modulator comes. I mean, isn't that part of the hope of all of this, what you're working on?
That would be the goal, that we can preserve lung function and reduce inflammation. Like you said, until the next great innovation from a modulator for the last 10% can be available to these patients. And we even think about it on a more global perspective. If you go outside the US, where patient access to modulators, it is not the same that it is here in the US. And we're really hopeful that, in the next study, that we're able to broadly, on a more global basis, enroll patients that are on CFTR modulators as well, and see if there's at least an equal signal of efficacy, or maybe even a stronger signal of efficacy in those patients that aren't on CFTR modulators. So at Clarametyx, we're trying to think, more broadly and more globally in terms of how we can address CF around the world.
And that's exciting. That's a huge point. That's so important. That will have that could potentially have such an impact. And we have talked about that, off the podcast before, just about access, such a huge problem. So that is also very exciting. Are you still looking for people for your clinical trials? Do you need more for the next phase?
We will. So the phase 2A study is close for enrollment, and we're getting all of those data readouts now. But we anticipate that that sometime early in 2027, if timelines continue on the current projections, that we will be looking for patients to enroll into the next phase 2 study for the broader bronchiectasis population. And we'll be looking to, within the CF network again, and going back to many of the same sites that were incredibly helpful in terms of enrollment in our last study, and also expanding our network outside of those academic centers.
And I don't think we can say it enough, and I think we need, or you need to say it again, but why is it so important that people enroll in these clinical trials?
It gives access to patients that may not otherwise have access to a therapy. And we think that something like CMTX 101 is potentially game changing science. And so for patients to be able to access game changing science prior to its regulatory approval, I think it is just a huge benefit for those that are able to qualify. And now that we've demonstrated safety and tolerability of this product in a 42 subject CF study, we hope that that gives families, people with CF, and their treating clinicians more comfort to enroll them in what will be our next cup of studies.
And we need diversity, right? We need Asians with CF. We need African Americans with CF. We need everybody, not just white people. And I know that's like everybody is working on that diversity. And I just like to say it again because it is really important. So we know how everyone reacts.
Yeah, and that's one of our goals at Clarametyx in terms of going broader and global for our next study. Is we all know that different populations metabolize drugs differently. They have different profiles depending on the degree of inflammatory lung disease that you have going on. We even know that if you look at bacteria in certain parts of the world, that there are different phenotypes and makeups of bacteria in all parts of the world. So we really want to have an understanding of how this drug, as you mentioned, works across a diverse group of individuals with CF.
It's so important that you are and your team make, I wouldn't say, well, I would say fun, but you make it interesting. You make it accessible. Your website is fantastic. I went over every page in your website and I encourage everyone to do it. It really makes it so that you can visually see cells and what you're talking about. And so you can read it in shorter paragraphs. It's not so scientific-y that you're so confused. I really appreciated everything that you had on your website, and the link is in our show notes so that when you want to enroll in a clinical trial at Clarametyx in 2027, you can get it there. But whoever did your website, I love it.
Well, thank you. We have an incredible team and a group of designers that went into that. And our motto at Clarametyx is everything is patient centric. So that is from the website to the way that we communicate externally, to the way that we speak with our clinical trial sites, to the way that we think about designing studies. It really comes back to being entirely patient centric. And as I'll often tell our team when we're signing off of a meeting or sending an email at the end of a long week, patients are waiting. And it's so true. Patients are waiting for this innovation and their caregivers. And sometimes life in biotech gets really busy and you have to just take a step back and remember how blessed we are to be able to work in this space and bring forward meaningful innovation for patients.
Well, I'm going to quote you on that quote. I love that. That is so true. That brings up actually a lot of emotion. That is, you've nailed it there in that short quote. I love it. Is there anything more that you want to tell us about what's happening at Clarametyx, what your plans are and hopes are for the future?
Yeah, so our hopes is that we're looking to become a broad chronic respiratory company that addresses a multitude of different bronchiectatic lung diseases. It could be NTM lung disease, which we know NTM is also a significant problem in people living with CF. COPD as well. There is a large component of COPD, which has a bronchiectasis component to it. There's just such a large market with unmet need out there that we really want to bring this innovation to fill that need. And, in addition to our therapeutic program, we're also working on a vaccination approach as well. So There's another part to this story that's a few years behind, but we think that the vaccination approach for certain patients and certain risk types and profiles arguably could be a better innovation than taking a therapeutic monoclonal antibody. So certainly that will have to prove out as we get into clinical studies with our vaccine. And then we're also looking more broadly at other anti-inflammatory approaches to chronic respiratory disease that have a different mechanism of action to not only CMTX 101, but a lot of the other innovations that are in the pipeline now. So we see a bright future for the company, and hope to make an announcement later this year that we're getting in and starting the next phase of clinical studies. It's just a really exciting time.
That is really exciting. And just because we use a lot of acronyms, when you say NTM, you're talking about Mycobacterium abscessus, correct? Is that correct?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
And the vaccines, can you elaborate just a little bit on what that will mean for people with cystic fibrosis or chronic disease?
Yeah, so we talked about how our therapeutic technology targets the biofilm and breaks it down and disrupts it. And the way that we think about the biofilm is it's almost like this protected structure, and you can think of it as a skyscraper. And what our technology does is it takes the rivets out of the skyscraper very rapidly. And when you do that, you have this rapid collapse of rubble. So the bacteria are left without any of this protective biofilm layer. So on the therapeutic side, and once there's an established biofilm, our therapeutic can go and attack that biofilm and disrupt it. And the vaccination approach, maybe in patients that have yet to establish biofilms or yet to have a bacterial infection. So thereby offering prevention in advance, right? When 6 months later after vaccination, you come down with a pulmonary exacerbation and a subsequent bacterial infection, you will have the immune response already generated to prevent the formation of these biofilms proactively.
That's very exciting, and cheers to research and development, and let's just keep it going. It's so needed and it's helping so many people. And what you discover for cystic fibrosis will help other diseases. It's so huge. Is this kind of what keeps you going in this field of science and disease?
It's what gets me out of bed every day. And, I think all of us have, some type of personal connection to science or medicine. And, for me, it was my daughter at a very young age needed to urgently have an operation for a very rare disorder. It was a curative operation, thankfully. She's living a totally healthy and normal life today. But when, at the age of 6 weeks, you pass your daughter off to an anesthesiologist and a surgeon and realize the amount of trust that you put in those individuals to, offer your child hope and a future. Those are the things that motivate me every day, is that knowing that I can get up and work on technologies that give patients, caregivers, and clinicians hope in a future. And to me, there's nothing more valuable and more rewarding to do in life than to be able to make an impact like that.
Well, that's fantastic. And I think the scientific community is lucky to have you and Clarametyx because you're already having a big impact. So thank you for everything you do and your team, because it's very exciting for the future of the CF community.
It's our pleasure. And none of this would be possible, again, without the clinicians, patients, and families who put their trust in us, and folks like you, Laura, that are out there making folks aware of Clarametyx and making folks aware of our clinical trials, and having someone like Ella on our team out there that has such a recognizable name and face within the community, having her on our side at meetings and engaging with patients and advocates and families, and just really bringing more awareness to the biofilm problem that we're addressing, which I think, is not always common knowledge in the public and even in the CF community. That's been incredible. And it just giving people, hope through clinical research has been, it's been just a nice journey.
Ella has CF. She is incredible. And for those who don't know, we're talking about Ella Balassa, who has cystic fibrosis, and she's fantastic and helped to explain a lot of this when I met her for the first time also at the NACFC. So we're grateful to her. We're grateful to you and Clarametyx. So thanks for joining us on the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. I'm glad that more people know about what you're doing because it will benefit them.
Well, thank you, Laura. It's been a pleasure, and we really look forward to doing this again. And maybe we can do it when we announce that our next clinical trial is opening. I think that'd be a great next platform to get our message out there.
That sounds great to me. Thank you, Dr. Steve St. Onge. And I thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. This was great.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen.
It's not complicated.
Who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrating, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, visit our website at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical, The Science of Possibility, and Viatris. It was produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Follow our show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.